May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dogya Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable and able to get out and do whatever you want within the confines of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So we're going to get right into Chapter 19 of Crooked Cucumber, the final season. But first, a word from our sponsor, which is you, dear listener. So, I'd like to encourage you, if you want to keep this ball rolling, go to the homepage of cuke.com and hit the donate button near the top or the bottom. Go to the donate page, and you'll find it's easy to do. Send a check, make a PayPal donation, or become a PayPal subscriber for as little as $1 a month, and it's easy, and it's a refreshing experience. Now, we here at Cuke.com, all of us, would like to encourage you, furthermore, to register to vote if you're an American citizen, and to vote. Let's see how many people can vote. It's a cool thing to do. If you're into hipness, it's a hip thing to do. If you're into spirituality, it's a very spiritual thing to do. If you're into wanting to be better than others, you can't be better than being a voter. And I could go on like this, but now it's time for pause to meditate, after which we will go straight into Chapter 19. So when you hear the bell, hit pause, and meditate or not for as long as you wish, and when you're through, hit unpause. And we'll be there on the other side waiting to hit that bell to end the meditation. We will have all meditated together. Even if you don't hit pause, the same is true. You'll just have a little mini meditation. Crooked Cucumber, the life and Zen teaching of Shunryu Suzuki, Chapter 19, Final Season. Drive the wave, ride the wave. After leaving Tassajara that day, Suzuki Roshi asked Yvonne to pull the car over when they reached the ridge. The view of coastal mountains, wide blue sky, and a streak of Pacific Ocean at the horizon was spectacular. Everyone got out and had a picnic. Below them were the rugged watersheds that fed into Tassajara Creek. Suzuki felt better after lunch and a rest. This was the spot where he had done his dance after first seeing Tassajara. They made another stop at a retreat center near San Juan Bautista, where Soen Nakagawa was in his last hours of a week-long sesshin. The Tassajara group joined in for the last period of zazen and the closing ceremony. In the retreat center of the mission, Nakagawa prepared and served thick green matcha tea for the Tassajara visitors and to some of the sesshin participants. Each bowl of tea was shared by 2 people, an uncommon style. The first one went to the Suzukis. They drank and admired the bowl made by Nakagawa from clay in Jerusalem, where he had established a zendo. Though he wasn't feeling well the next day, Suzuki gave the Saturday lecture in the city. He spoke of the visit with Nakagawa. At the end of his sesshin, we bowed maybe more than 30 times, calling many Buddhas names. He called some by special names: Sunshine Buddha, Moonlight Buddha, Dead Sea Buddha, the Good Practice Buddha. Many Buddhas appeared and bowed and bowed and bowed. This is something beyond our understanding. When he bowed to all those Buddhas, the Buddhas he bowed to were beyond his own understanding. Again and again he did it. And he served us matcha from a bowl which he made himself. What he was doing, I don't know. He didn't know. He looked very happy, but that happiness is very different from the happiness we usual people have. Our practice should go to that level where there is no human problem, no Buddha problem, where there is nothing. To have tea, to have cake, to make a trip from one place to another is his practice. He has no idea of helping people. What he is doing is helping, but he himself has no idea of helping people. And then Shunryu Suzuki, sipping water from the cup Miss Ransom gave him, concluded his last public lecture by saying, "To solve our human problem doesn't cover all of Buddhist practice, and we don't know how long it takes for us to make the Buddha trip. We have many trips, work trips, space trips, the various trips we must have. The Buddha trip is a very long trip. This is Buddhism." Thank you very much. To observe things in a flash, that is non-duality. Silas had given some lectures that summer at Suzuki's behest. In early September, Suzuki asked Silas to come see him. As they talked, seated in the tatami room of Suzuki's apartment, Suzuki fingered his mala, a Buddhist rosary. It had sandalwood beads, each carved into the shape of a skull. Silas looked at the skulls and at Suzuki, and he felt deeply apprehensive. Suzuki was very ill. His skin was yellow. The doctor said he had hepatitis. Oksan was taking care of him with assistance from Ivan, who also kept him abreast of Zen Center matters. They were very careful to avoid infection and didn't share any food with him, as had been their habit. Aside from attending an occasional zazen, the last time he'd done anything in public was the lay ordination of 55 students at the end of August. He hadn't even been able to attend his own ordination of 4 new priests in September. Katagiri, now called Katagiri Roshi at Suzuki's request, performed it for him by proxy, having come up from Tassajara, where he was leading the practice period. Ed Brown was first in line, then me, then Lou Richmond, who'd been studying with Suzuki since 1967, and Angie Runyon. Suzuki's absence was conspicuous. It was a somber occasion. Afterward, we all went to his apartment to greet him and stood at his bedside. He acted like it was the happiest day of his life. After leaving the room, I went up on the roof of the building, walked amidst the potted plants, looked out over San Francisco and cried. A young monk named Ryuho Yamada arrived from Japan in late September. Over tea, Oksan learned that he knew the healing arts of shiatsu, pressure point massage, and acupuncture. She asked him to give her a treatment, and he passed the test. He was supposed to have gone straight down to Tassajara, but now he was needed in the city. Every afternoon, he worked on Suzuki for a couple of hours. Ryuho was a thick, spectacled, enthusiastic, naive young monk, and he immediately started gobbling up the strange experience of Zen in America. He knew quite a bit of English and spent a lot of time talking with students. Ryuho-san, if you continue to live in America and you want to be a success in America, you have to be majime. If you are not majime, you will not be appreciated. Suzuki was sitting up in bed, talking in Japanese to the new monk. Oksan had told him the same thing. Just be majime, and you'll have nothing to worry about. Majime is usually translated as serious, but it includes the quality of sincerity and enthusiasm. In Japan, Ryuho knew he could easily get by as a priest with canned majime. There were centuries of tradition in the cloud of vagueness to hide in, but in America, the students were straightforward and everything was clear. He loved the communal aspects of Zen Center, the natural food, women and men living together on an equal basis, Even Suzuki's wife was willful and would tangle with him. The students saw in Ryuho, as in other Japanese monks, qualities that they admired. A perfect place for Japanese monks, he thought. They can learn from us, and we can learn from them. Ryuho discovered Suzuki could be short-tempered. Once Ryuho commented on a Buddha statue, casually saying it was just a piece of wood. Suzuki barked at him not to speak so flippantly. Until he knew the true meaning of the statue, he should shut up. Then, as quickly as anger came, it was gone. Ah, thought Ryuho, he's innocent and honest, like a child. So you've come to see our yellow Roshi, Yvonne said. And that's how Albert Stunkard learned Suzuki was ill. Yellow, he asked? Yes, he has hepatitis. Dr. Albert Stunkard was chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania. In September 1971, he had come out to work at Stanford Hospital for a year, largely because he wanted to be near Suzuki, whom he had studied with in the past. Stunkard, one of the senior Zen practitioners in the States, had started his study when he was a doctor to Japanese prisoners being tried for war crimes in Tokyo in 1946. One of them had told him about D.T. Suzuki. He met the great scholar and subsequently became his student and occasional doctor. Stunkard had studied with Nakagawa, Yasutani, and other teachers as well. He met Shunryu Suzuki for the first time at Sokoji in 1967, and Suzuki embarrassed him by asking him to deliver the lecture that evening. Entering Suzuki's bedroom, Stunkard saw that Suzuki was scratching. A chill went down Stunkard's spine. He knew there were two types of jaundice. One, infectious hepatitis. The other, obstructive. An obstruction to the outflow of bile causes itching. The obstruction couldn't be gallstones because Suzuki's gallbladder had been removed. Stunkard felt terrible but didn't say anything at the time. He just asked if he could confer with Suzuki's doctor. If you were not born in this world, there would be no need to die. To be born in this world is to die, to disappear. Laughing. On October 10th, 1971, Shunryu Suzuki called his Bay Area disciples together. They were asked to wear their robes. At 10 o'clock, they entered the apartment and gathered around his bed, joining his team of caregivers. Ryuho sitting on the floor, Oksan by the door looking tired, and Yvonne at the bedside fussing with Suzuki over an office cassette recorder. Mel had driven in from Berkeley and Bill from Tassajara, where he was Shuso, head monk. Also present were Silas, Reb, Lou, and Angie, all of whom lived in the building. Claude came from his home in San Francisco. Everyone was quiet. there was a feeling of tense anticipation. Suzuki sat up in bed, propped up by pillows. He was frail and thin, and his skin had become a darker yellow, but his spirits were good. He smiled warmly, glad to be with so many of his closest students. He hadn't seen them much in the past 6 weeks. They returned his smiles and stood in a semicircle around his bed. On Page Street, cars passed, and birds chirped in the rubber tree outside the window. Suzuki cleared his throat and turned on the tape recorder. Then he softly told them what they feared to hear. As you know, my doctor thought I had hepatitis, but my symptoms didn't change for such a long time, so he thought it might not be hepatitis, maybe cancer. So I went into Mount Zion Hospital again 3 days ago, and they checked me out, and the doctors discussed my illness. The day before yesterday, my doctor came and told me, "You have cancer," and he explained exactly what is happening. So now I am telling you. Suzuki immediately set about putting people at ease with a positive spin to the news. He spoke as if it were a big deal, adding it was a great relief to find out he had cancer and not hepatitis, because now he could eat and drink whatever he wanted, and they could share food with him without worrying about contagion. I myself, selfishly, feel good, but on the other hand, I'm very sorry for you. But I think Buddha will take care of everything, so I won't worry too much. How long I'll live, I don't know. No one knows, actually. I asked the doctor. 2 years? At most, he said. I'm not so sure about it, so I want you to be prepared. If I live longer, it is better, of course, for me and for you. I think I can live 1 more year for sure. I feel that way. I don't feel so discouraged or weak. So maybe I want you to allow me to be a lazy monk. That's all. I shall be a very bad example. But, laughing, instead, you should be a good example, okay? That's all that I want you to do, to prepare. Most things you can decide among yourselves. If necessary, I can join your discussions. Physically, I get tired quite easily. Thank you very much. Abruptly, he turned to Claude, the oldest, whose counsel he had valued since they first met in 1963. Claude, I want you to stay here, even though I am no more. Okay? Please? Claude, cornered, affirmed that he would. Thank you, Suzuki said, going on to make a point about their robes as priests and about the priest's responsibility with the larger community. You shouldn't feel you have to do exactly what I did, you know. You are free to develop our way as people want you to do. That is the Bodhisattva idea. He leaned close to the mic when he said this. He was speaking to Richard Baker, for whom the tape was being made. Suzuki's tone of voice said, "You should come back now and assume this responsibility." Richard and Suzuki had been corresponding with Yvonne's assistants throughout his stay in Japan. Since the spring, there had been discussion of Richard's returning in the fall or winter to assume some of Suzuki's responsibilities. Richard had been resistant to the idea. He didn't feel ready for that. Now, Suzuki was twisting his arm. After some joking with his disciples, Suzuki had the tape rewound and played. At the exchange with Claude, he listened carefully, stopped the machine, and acted pleased that Claude was on tape saying he would stay, although his answer was fairly inaudible. Suzuki bowed to his crestfallen disciples, and they bowed back, going out with tears in their eyes to share the tragic news with the community. The day before, when Yvonne had gone to the hospital to pick up Suzuki, she'd found him sitting on the edge of his bed with legs dangling below his hospital gown. Oak-san was in the hall, saying goodbye to some visitors. The nurse had just brought his lunch, and he patted the bed and motioned to Yvonne to come over. She knew something was up. He slowly mouthed the words, "I have cancer," with a big grin on his face. She was confused because the two things didn't go together, cancer and grinning. As she sat next to him, he pulled over the food tray. "I have cancer. That means we can eat together again." He took a forkful from his plate and fed it to her. Yvonne threw her arms around him and cried. "This cancer is my friend, and my practice will be to take care of this sickness," he told her. Dr. Stunkert, who had first realized Suzuki had cancer, talked to him about going to the cutting-edge Stanford Cancer Unit, but Suzuki decided against it, saying, "This doctor is my doctor, and I have to respect him. It wouldn't be appropriate to see another doctor." Stunkert tried to tell him things were different in America, but Suzuki stood firm. After talking further with his colleagues at Stanford, Stunkert decided that Suzuki had made the right decision. The type of cancer he had was not responsive to treatment. It had spread, and radiation and chemotherapy would just make him sicker. "You know, we often talked about teaching in the past," Suzuki said to Stunkert. "So many of these young people are afraid of dying. I can show them that you don't need to be afraid of dying. It's a wonderful teaching opportunity." "I wish you were doing some other kind of teaching," Stunkert said. "Yes, I don't want to die. I don't know what it's going to be like when I die. Nobody knows what that's going to be like. But when I die, I'll still be a Buddha. I may be a Buddha in agony, or I may be a Buddha in bliss. But I'll die knowing that this is how it is." Wherever you go, you will find your teacher, as long as you have eyes to see and ears to hear. Ryuho continued to do shiatsu on Suzuki every day. He concentrated on points in Suzuki's back that corresponded to the liver. He pressed his feet and legs and arms. Suzuki was weak but alert. If Ryuho's mind wandered while working, Suzuki would immediately tell him to concentrate. Ryuho was intrigued by the people who came to see Suzuki: disciples, students, friends, scholars, artists, teachers, priests, members of the Japanese congregation at Sokoji, other Buddhist teachers. There was Maizumi, the teacher of the LA Zen Center, who'd known Suzuki since 1959, and Bishop Sumi from Zen Shuji in LA, Edo Shimano, Nakagawa's disciple and the teacher of the Zen Studies Society in New York, dropped by to pay his respects one day. Bob Halpern visited. He had been studying with the Tibetan teacher Trungpa in Boulder. On Suzuki's bedside table was a large postcard Bob had sent. Instead of a note, he had drawn a picture of Trungpa's altar, which had a Buddha in the center. Trungpa's Tibetan guru on the left, and Suzuki Roshi on the right. Trungpa came a few days later. Suzuki spoke to him optimistically about the future of Buddhism in America. Trungpa sat by Suzuki's bed, holding his hand, for over an hour. Almost every day, some old-timer would enter Suzuki's room and stay for half an hour. Betty, Della, Jean, Mike Dixon, and others. Suzuki had asked Philip to come as much as possible. He would drive in every few days from Santa Rosa. Oak-san told Philip that Suzuki said to let him in any time he came. Philip said he'd break down the door if he couldn't get in. Graham sent a letter from Tokyo expressing concern and saying that he'd come as soon as he could in late December when he would be visiting Pauline and the children in Mill Valley. He was fully involved with the English language school he had started and could not get away until then. Ryuho stood by and listened as Alan Watts and Jano paid their respects. He couldn't understand what they were saying, but it was a lively meeting considering Suzuki's condition. Watts was in fine form. Jano teased her husband, and Ryuho worried that Suzuki would die on the spot. He was laughing so hard. Louise brought her newborn daughter to visit, wearing a tiny rakusu, the last that Suzuki had inscribed. The little one's name was Johanna. Suzuki was sitting on a low table in the tatami room. In front of him was his well-worn pocket-sized dictionary brought from Japan and often carried back and forth between Tassajara and the city. He picked it up and said, "This will live longer than I." Suzuki expressed great regret over his cancer. "Before my disciples are ready to come out of the oven, I will be getting into it." Louise was surprised at his sadness because she still had the idea that a Zen teacher wouldn't have that kind of feeling. Suzuki told Bill Kwong the opposite, saying, "I put my cookies in the oven and they've come out fine, and now I'm going to crawl in." He'd say different things at different times, but clearly he was thinking about his disciples and what to do for them before he died. Richard Baker was coming back. There was going to be a ceremony to make him the new abbot. Page Street and Tassajara were abuzz with talk about it. How could this be? He'd received transmission, but still, could he take on Suzuki's role? What about Katagiri? What about the other priests? What about Bill Kwong, who'd been with Suzuki almost from the first and who had a zendo in Mill Valley? What about Silas, who was giving lectures? Jean in Carmel Valley? Mel in Berkeley and other disciples? Suzuki told Claude that he wanted to give transmission to a number of his disciples before he died. Especially, he emphasized, he must complete Bill Kwong's transmission ceremony. But there were others. He was thinking of giving transmission to 6 or more disciples. He wanted to ask Noiri Roshi to come over from Japan to work with these students for several months in preparation for the ceremony. Claude asked what would be the difference between Richard's transmission and these, and Suzuki said, They will be the same as Richard's, no different. Claude conferred with a few people, and they all agreed that Suzuki was too ill to do this. Oksan was also opposed to her husband's plan. Noiri needed a special diet, and she'd have to take care of them both, which would be too much for her. Suzuki made it clear how much he wanted to do it, but Oksan said to leave it to Richard, who was coming back, and he could carry out Suzuki's wishes. She and Claude agreed, and after they told Suzuki how they felt, he gave up and didn't mention it again, not even to Richard. Suzuki asked Oksan to go back to Japan after he'd passed his authority to Richard in the mountain seat ceremony. He said he wanted to do Sai Tokudo reordination. She knew he wanted to spend the remaining time with his students and to let them take care of him, to be as close to them as possible. He'd read a book Katagiri had given him by Koto Sawaki with an introduction by Katagiri's second teacher, Eko Hashimoto. It stressed that priests should practice celibacy and not live with women. It didn't seem very practical to Oksan. She said, "I'd comply with your wish if you were getting well, but I couldn't possibly leave you in this condition. Who would cook rice gruel and other Japanese food for you? You need someone who can understand your needs by a single wink." She wrote to Hoitsu immediately, and he wrote right back, urging her to stay with her husband by all means, or they'd have to send someone else from the family to take care of him. Hoitsu sent a similar letter to his father, so Suzuki gave up on that idea too. One by one, he had to let go of his wishes. When he had enough energy to walk down the stairs to the basement, Suzuki still went to Zazen occasionally. Afterward, he couldn't get back up. He wanted to make it on his own, but he couldn't. Sometimes Reb and Peter would make a chair out of their arms, and he'd sit and enjoy the ride. He made it fun. He was very sweet about such dependence. His life was not in his own hands anymore. Zen is the practice of all existence with everything else. Stars, moons, sun, mountains, rivers, animate and inanimate beings. Sometimes the pain in our legs practices zazen. Sometimes our sleepy mind practices zazen on a black cushion, on a chair, or even in bed. Richard Baker returned with Virginia and their daughter, Sally. As soon as they arrived, he went to see Suzuki. Soon, Suzuki Roshi would pass to him the enormous responsibility of taking care of Zen Center and all the people who came there. He would be the chief priest. "I'm so sorry for what I'm about to do to you," Suzuki said to him, tears filling his eyes. "How could someone with your intuition choose to marry someone as difficult as me?" Oksan asked him. "Because you are ridiculously honest," he said. "What should I do when you die?" she asked him. "Stay here," he said. "Don't go back at all." He said everyone would be happy if she stayed, that her 10 years in America would make it hard for her to adjust to Rinso-in. But how could she be helpful at Zen Center, she wanted to know. You are fair in your dealings with people. It will work out naturally. Should I become a nun? Oh, that would be best. I'm too old for that. Maybe I'll be a monk in my next life. That got him laughing, which started him coughing. Oksan helped him over onto all fours so she could pound his back. He stopped coughing. You're lucky to have someone to take care of you to the last moment, she said in a teasing voice. Suzuki raised a hand in faint gaucho. Then he farted loudly. That's for you, he said. Nirvana is seeing one thing through to the end. Knowing that their father could pass away at any time, Suzuki's daughter Yasuko and son Hoitsu arrived for the first time in the States with Godfather Amano to say their farewells. They were shocked to see him so jaundiced and weak. They stood at his bed, saying a few polite phrases, not knowing what to do. But Suzuki was more open and easygoing than in the old days, and before long they were talking comfortably with him and among themselves. Oksan was making noodles in the cramped kitchen. Then Philip, a familiar face, came to visit. At Page Street and later at Tassajara, his children witnessed with amazement what Suzuki had accomplished in his 12 years in the States. It was hard for Yasuko and Hoitsu to imagine that their father was a Dharma teacher with many disciples and that a book of his lectures was selling well. They were impressed that everyone called him Roshi and amazed to hear from Americans such enthusiastic praise for his lectures. Mother always said his problem was that he didn't know how to lecture about Buddhism, that he didn't express himself well enough, Hoitsu said. Their father had hardly ever said anything to them about Buddhism, so they didn't even think of him as someone with a particularly good understanding of it. But the evidence of his effort lay before their eyes. Yasuko, Hoitsu, and Godfather Amano arrived at Tassajara in time to attend Bill Kwong's head monk ceremony, at which Katagiri officiated. One after another, the American students put their hands in gassho and asked the head monk questions about Dharma and life. Hoitsu couldn't believe what he was seeing and got teary. They were doing the ceremony sincerely, spontaneously, and in good form. I came up from Tassajara to pay a visit to my dying teacher. Richard answered the door. I'd already spent time with Richard at Tassajara, so we just greeted each other briefly. Right now is a good time to see Roshi, he told me. Knowing me well, Richard was quite firm about the time limit. Don't spend any longer than 5 minutes unless Suzuki Roshi absolutely insists that you stay longer. Okay, I promise, I told him. After I'd put on my robes, I went to his room. Oksan led me into the bedroom and directed me to a chair next to his bed. Suzuki looked up and smiled. We bowed. He looked terrible. With some difficulty, he pulled himself up and sat on the edge of the bed close to me. Then he slapped his thighs like he'd do to indicate pleasure. I just sat there moping. I feel fine, he said. I don't feel so serious. That was all I needed. Okay, I said, snapping out of it. He asked me what I was doing at Tassajara, and I said I was the assistant director. He acted impressed. Then he gave me a little advice. He said that as a priest, I should have two specialties, one primary and one secondary. My first one, he said, should be to take care of guests, something I'd done since Tassajara opened, and the second one could possibly be scholarship. His point wasn't to tell me what to do. He trusted that my seniors at Zen Center and I would work out the details on our own. It didn't matter to him so much what I did, I think, but he knew I needed some wholesome activity to be engaged in through the years that would both express my true nature and keep me out of trouble. I was touched by his concern. Here he was, wasting away, and all his attention was on another, giving me a boost, conspiring with me to the end to have faith in myself. We talked a while longer, and then I said to him I had to go. No, stay, he said. I remembered what Richard said, and I also thought Suzuki should lie down and rest, so I stood up and bowed, and he said, if you leave, I will be unhappy. If you stay, I will be happy. Okay, I said. He asked me if I'd met his family, and I said yes, that I'd shown them around Tassajara. So he called them all in, and we talked and visited for half an hour. It was lots of fun, and I completely forgot that Suzuki was dying, and this was the last time he would meet. I don't even remember saying goodbye to him. With these hands, I have done many things in my life, Suzuki told Hoitsu. I never imagined all the things I would do with these hands in America. Now my work is almost finished. It would be good to go back to Japan and die there. Would you like to go back to Japan with me? Hoitsu asked. I will crawl if necessary, his father answered. Hoitsu was surprised to hear his father say that. Since his third year in America, it had seemed that he would never return. Seeing his two eldest children and Amano must have weakened a nostalgia for his homeland. The ceremony was a week off. They could bring Suzuki back with them right after that. Hoitsu talked to Okusan, Yasuko, and Amano. With help from Okusan, he talked to Suzuki's doctor, who said Suzuki could do it. Hoitsu went to tell his father, Master, the doctor said you can come back with us. Suzuki looked up at Hoitsu and laughed. Isn't it obvious there's no way I could leave here? Can't you people even take a joke? You were just telling us what we wanted to hear, Hoitsu said. Yes, of course. I will become American soil. Yasuko saw her father in a new light in America. Putting a positive spin on his misfortune, he told her he'd lived longer than he'd expected, that his master Soen had died at the age of 55. He was now 67. The 12 extra years were his time in America. Suzuki's chronological accuracy was sometimes off. Soen actually died when he was 57. Suzuki was thin, soft, and open to her. She'd never felt closer to him and was sorry she'd seen so little of him since he left Japan. She could finally forgive him for the death of her mother and saw his accomplishments in America not only as atonement for her, but as partially motivated by her mother's death. She thought of the time in the 5th grade when he'd taken her to Shizuoka City and, embarrassed to be seen with him, she'd walked on the other side of the street. She didn't feel that gap now. The bond between children and parents is never lost, he told her. Godfather Amano felt he had accomplished the purpose of his trip. He had seen Suzuki, his temples, his students. He could see that Suzuki was going to die. I'd better go back now, he said. He too had cancer and trouble with his bowels. And though he wasn't dying or sick like his old friend, it was difficult for him to stay. But Suzuki wanted him to witness Richard's mountain seat ceremony. Father, Suzuki said to him, there is one more important job I need to do as a monk. Please see it and report it to the membership at Rinso-in. Tell them what I have done since I left them and came here. Father, please fulfill Hojo's wishes, said Oksan. Finally, Amano agreed to stay. It was more difficult every day for Suzuki to talk, but he could do it, especially with Oksan, with whom he could communicate with much less effort. I won't interfere with Zen Center at all once I have handed it over to Richard. It's entirely up to him whether it will be ruined or not, Suzuki said to his wife. He even told her and Richard that he didn't want any more Japanese priests to come to Zen Center as teachers. From now on, they should come as students. The most important point is to continue our way and to have a good successor. On November 21st, at 10 in the morning, the halls and courtyard of Zen Center were filled with people talking softly and waking. They had come for the mountain seat ceremony in which Richard Baker was to be installed as the chief priest of Zen Center. The foyer and hallway were lined with rows of chairs. The Buddha hall, where the ceremony was to take place, was too small for the 500 guests. Chinese, Tibetan, and Japanese priests of various sects attended with some of their disciples. Many of the key figures in Suzuki's life in America were there. Kazumitsu and Emikato, Reverend Ogui, George Hagiwara, and many from the Japanese congregation of Sokoji. Bill McNeil stood in the corner in a leather jacket. Poets and artists from the old beat days came in the front door. So many people who had become deeply connected in the past 12 years, so many stories like fibers running among them, so many for whom Suzuki had opened Dharma gates or been there with a nudge when their lives turned. The bell downstairs was being struck every minute, informing the crowd that it was time to settle down. People patiently sat or stood where they were. They could hear a procession moving from Katagiri's apartment up the street into the building and to its various altars. The rumble of the deep Buddha drum echoed in the halls. The high chin-chun of handbells, the half-tone apart, and the kachin of wooden clackers, the music of the moving rite. On the second floor, the procession stopped outside Suzuki's room, where Richard offered incense and said, "Although I don't know how I came, through your heart teaching, I am always here." Katagiri Roshi, Kobun Sensei, and a few of Suzuki's senior monks accompanied Richard down the stairs to the hushed Buddha hall. Richard wore a blue and gold robe with bright-colored flying phoenixes, which Suzuki had given him for the day. He carried a ceremonial horsehair whisk. The assembled crowd was utterly hushed when the spine-chilling sound of intermittent thuds and jangling bells jolted everyone to attention. Suzuki was walking with the staff Alan Watts had given him. Affixed to the top was a bronze headpiece with rings. At his sides were Hoitsu and Oksan. They helped him down the stairs and past those seated and standing along the way to the double doors of the Buddha hall. With each step, he struck the floor with his staff as if continuing to plant the Dharma in America. There he was, his reddish-brown okesa draping over a yellow koromo. All eyes were on him. Many people hadn't seen him in his illness, and even to those who had, his appearance was crushing. He was so dark, weak, and shrunken. Yet as he moved into the Buddha hall toward the specially built mountain seat altar, his enormous effort and dignity shone through. Reaching the brocade-covered altar, still supported on both sides, he slowly pulled out from the sleeve of his robe a bowing cloth. Gathering his strength, he laid it properly, bowed to the floor, and rose, somehow drawing strength from the depth of his will, calm and powerful, the way frail old Kitano Roshi had risen from his bows at Eiheiji, amazing and inspiring the young Suzuki. Hoitsu helped him to a cushioned ceremonial chair to the right of the altar. He sat and looked with eyes straight ahead, yet downcast, as in zazen. People were just catching their breath when Richard stepped forward. After the Heart Sutra was recited, Richard stood before the mountain seat altar and said in classical style, "This mountain seat, climbed many times before, is the everywhere Bodhi Mandala. With the help of my master and everyone here in the 10 directions and the 3 times, I will climb this mind seal altar. Do not wonder about it at all." He offered incense to Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and ancestors, to Trudy Dixon, Katagiri Roshi, and to my own subtle and compassionate teacher, Suzuki Shunryu Daisho, to whom he said, drawing from Suzuki's own mountain seat ceremony at Sokoji in 1962, "This piece of incense, which I have had for a long, long time, I offer with no hand to my master, to my friend, Suzuki Shunryu Daisho, the founder of these temples. There is no measure of what you have done. Walking with you in Buddha's gentle rain, our robes are soaked through, but on the lotus leaves, not a drop remains." Richard sat on a red lacquered chair before the altar. Katagiri spoke for Suzuki loud and clear, "Dragons and elephants accept this holder of Buddha's first seat." Then Richard Baker said in what may be called the first lecture of his abbotship, "There is nothing to be said." A mondo followed, ritualized yet impromptu questions, which Richard answered quickly and dramatically. Telegrams were read, formal congratulations were made, and the ceremony was over. Suzuki was helped to face the altar, where he made another slow, painful prostration from which he rose almost by himself. Then he started down the aisle to leave. Halfway to the open doorway, he stopped, in the midst of his Sangha, disciples, students, former students, admirers, old friends, visiting teachers, and guests. There was utter silence. He looked to the left, then decisively rolled the staff several times between his hands. The rings at the top burst out jangling. He looked to the right and rolled his staff again, and again the rings rang out. It was the sound of an ultimate effort. It was the sound of his love and his freedom. Tears and sobbing began on all sides. Hearts cracked open. Everyone was suspended in his presence, in an immense shared feeling. A car honking on the street, pigeons cooing, the crying in the room, and a deep stillness. Time stopped. A moment that started the day he arrived in America continued as he was helped out of the room, striking his staff to the floor as he went. He left behind him a room full of palms pressed together, saying thank you, saying goodbye, saying what could not be said. After the ceremony, Suzuki met with his disciples. 20 or so of us sat on the tatami in his sitting room. It was done. He'd passed on to Zen Center, Page Street, and Tassajara to Zentatsu Richard Baker, who sat next to him, a head higher in his fancy robes, his eyes down, the weight of what he'd received all over him. Suzuki turned to him, nodded, and smiled. The room was hushed. In a faint voice, Suzuki said thank you to everyone and to Richard, and then, nodding toward Katagiri, another breathy thank you for all you've done, for which I am so grateful. All of a sudden, a howl arose. It was Katagiri who crawled toward Suzuki, crying out, "Don't die!" Sobbing, he hugged frail Suzuki, who said in a soft rasp, "Daijobu, daijobu, it's all right, it's all right." Katagiri had said goodbye to Suzuki and was on his way back to Tassajara for the last few weeks of the practice period. He left in sadness and with some discomfort in his situation. 7 years he'd served Suzuki. Hard work, low pay, no time off. Katagiri was dependable and had a seamless, constant practice. He'd come to be seen as a co-teacher by many. Suzuki and Katagiri had contained their feelings, speaking little through the years, until the meeting with his disciples following Richard's mountain seat ceremony. Suzuki had never verbally expressed his gratitude. Suzuki was still troubled by Katagiri's intention to leave. He wanted him to remain a senior Dharma teacher for the whole community. "Maybe Katagiri can still help," he said to Oksan as he went to sleep. Katagiri wasn't the only person he had troubled thoughts about. Unfinished business pressed at Suzuki. Bill, Silas. He wanted to take care of his disciples. Suzuki's style was to let things happen, nudging them, patiently waiting, acting skillfully by not acting rashly. He hadn't known how quickly his illness would overcome him. Some disciples were disturbed. A few had postponed or given up careers to devote themselves to studying with this dying man. Would he leave no final instructions? So far, Suzuki's instructions were not about practical matters, but about dying with dignity. It was tragic for his students to see the deteriorating physical condition of their dear teacher. Yet at the same time, it was marvelous to witness his composure and see how undiminished he was at heart. In his last meeting with Hoitsu before his son returned to Japan, Suzuki implored, "Take care of Bill Kwong for me. Make sure Bill gets transmission. You can do it for me." Suzuki wanted Hoitsu to be available to help his disciples in whatever way he could, but Hoitsu knew his father didn't want him to interfere with Richard. "Leave Zen Center to Richard," he'd said several times. Hoitsu also knew that leaders need assistance, and his father knew it too. Richard would need help from his elders like Katagiri and Claude, and from his peers like Bill and Silas. If he disagreed with them, he should work with and respect them. Suzuki knew there was rivalry, but hoped it would move toward cooperation. "It is done," he said to his son. "All I can do now is hope." With the trust he had in Richard and in others, and considering his patience and acceptance of problems, Suzuki's hope might have included more possibilities than were imagined by his students. If some disciples couldn't work together, maybe they could work separately. If there were sharp differences, maybe time would smooth the edges. Ultimately, if people were sincere, it would be okay. He might have looked at his students through his dying eyes and thought as when Tatsugami landed, "You have no idea how much you're going to suffer." Amano came to his bedside to say goodbye. "I've finished all my duties," Suzuki told him. "Please report the details to the members." "Hai," Amano answered in the affirmative. Suzuki gave Amano his mala bracelet with the skull-shaped beads. He told Okusan to roll up a scroll for Yasuko and to give Hoitsu the staff with the bronze rings he'd carried in the ceremony. The clangor on top of the staff was the last item he wanted to return to Rinsoin of those he had borrowed when he left in 1959. "Well, we're leaving now," said Amano. "Okay, goodbye, Father. Have a good trip," Suzuki said softly. Hoitsu couldn't believe how casually the two said farewell, as if it were just another day. Sitting on the plane before takeoff, Yasuko was crying. She wanted to get off and stay with her father. Hoitsu told her they had to go back now to help Amano explain to people what their father had been doing in America these 12 years, what he had created and was leaving behind. Nobody had really understood why he left. Now Amano, Yasuko, and Hoitsu knew he would tell the others, who should feel some pride in this too. The ancient bodhisattvas were not afraid of, but found joy in failure, poverty, and death, and in doing small things. A hospital bed was put in a second-floor room overlooking the courtyard. There, Suzuki could have a sense of the rhythm of the building and some time in the sunlight. The Buddha hall was below. During morning service, he'd listen to the sounds of chanting, drums, and bells coming through the window and the open door. Okusan would wash his face. He'd have a glass of orange juice. That was his service, he said. He was too weak to get out of bed. Ryuho would get lost looking at Suzuki's face as he gave him shiatsu treatments. It was spacey and changing, he said, and it didn't look Japanese. He could obviously die at any time. Okusan and the doctor said so too. His skin was dark, almost the color of the brown okesa robe, but to Ryuho, the light in his eyes was powerful. Ivan was there every day, staying with him while Oksan cooked, did laundry, and cleaned. They took turns caring for him and massaging his back, legs, arms, wherever he'd indicate. Ivan would be sitting by his bed and a skinny arm would come out from the covers and go into the air. She'd rub it for a while, then he'd pull it back under the covers. Later, the other arm would appear. She and Oksan massaged and moved him enough so that he hadn't gotten any bed sores. He never complained and always appreciated the attention he received. There was a bottle of painkillers on the table. He refused them after the gallbladder operation. He had tried them once because his doctor told him to, but he didn't like the state of mind that resulted, so he asked Ivan to take them away. Still, he told Richard that sometimes he felt like he was being tortured. One day, Suzuki asked Ivan to come close to him, and when she did, he apologized for not having ordained her as a priest, saying again that he lacked confidence in training women. "I didn't recognize your seriousness to practice," he said. Suzuki asked Ivan about Silas and was pained to hear that he had already left to lead sessions in Portland and Quadra Island near Vancouver. Silas had come to say goodbye, but Suzuki had been sleeping. He sat next to him for a while and then left. Silas did not see eye to eye with Richard and had argued that the membership should have had a chance to approve of Richard as the new abbot. Most people just wanted to do what Suzuki wanted. The board members were all students and couldn't accept Silas's democratic and legal approach. He hadn't seen much of Suzuki since Richard returned. Now, Suzuki was thinking about Silas. Within a week of the ceremony, Suzuki had almost completely stopped talking. Then he stopped eating. His body was soft and weak and thin, the size of an 8-year-old child. It had always had a childlike quality, but with great strength and energy, the power to move large stones. Now it was a dark, dying child's body. Oksan told Ryuho not to bother coming anymore. Either Oksan or Ivan stayed close by. They still massaged him gently, but to Ivan it seemed that mainly they were just breathing together. She felt there was almost nothing they needed to do. Just leave him alone, be with him, and respond to his few requests. They wiped his face. When he stopped drinking, they kept his lips and mouth moist with a washcloth. Richard came every day. Sometimes he would talk to Suzuki with Oksan's help. She said he could hardly hear now. "Where will I meet you?" Richard asked, standing in gasho at the foot of the bed. Suzuki's hands came out from under the covers in gasho. Then, with index finger extended, he drew a circle in the air, bowed into it, and returned his hands under the covers. Richard bowed in return. That we are here means we will vanish. On the evening of December 3rd, Suzuki was moved from the hospital bed, overlooking the courtyard to his own bed in his apartment. Tomorrow, he told Oak-san in a hoarse whisper, I must talk to Richard about Silas. Oak-san went into the tatami room and spread out the futon. For the first time, she didn't put on her pajamas, but left her clothes on and lay down exhausted to sleep. Suzuki's son, Otohiro, had been there for a couple of days and said he would stay till the end, which he knew was near. He slept on Oak-san's bed, up against his father's in the small room. At about 2 in the morning, Otohiro shook Oak-san awake. Mother, father wants a bath. No. She went in and told her husband to go back to sleep. He repeated that he wanted a bath. The thought of it made Oak-san anxious. He hadn't been in the tub for a long time. It's okay, he said. Otohiro wasn't going to argue. He knew the old man would be stubborn to the end. Oak-san went into the bathroom and started to fill the tub. Otohiro carried him into the bathroom slowly and placed him in the tub. Suzuki started gasping for air, breathing fast. It's over now, he said between short breaths. Calm down. Otohiro spoke soothingly in his ear, holding him. Breathe slowly. Otohiro breathed loudly and slowly, and his father's breath slowed down till they were breathing together at the same slow rate. Suzuki asked for the bar of scented soap that Della had given him. He never used anything scented, but he took it and made a good lather, and they helped him to clean himself thoroughly. Then he took a long, relaxed bath. Afterward, Suzuki lay on the bed and sighed. Slowly and faintly he spoke. Ah, what a good feeling, he said with a wisp of pleasure on his face. Don't wake me in the morning. Maybe you're thirsty, said Oak-san. Would you like some orange juice or ice cream? Orange juice. He drank some orange juice, closed his eyes, and went to sleep. Oak-san went back to her futon, and Otohiro lay next to his father in the bed. Before long it was 4, and he heard the wake-up bell, a handbell, run through the halls to get people up for Zazen. It was not just any day's Zazen, but December 4th, the first day of a 5-day sesshin that would culminate on Buddha's Enlightenment Day, the 8th of December. Over 100 people were participating. Otohiro could hear people opening and closing doors carefully, running water in the bathroom across the hall. Then came the sharp sound of the wooden han being hit, indicating that the new abbot, Zintatsu Bakuroshi, as Suzuki had said to call him, was on his way to offer incense at various altars. The last altar was the one in the Zendo, where he would open the sesshin and begin the first period of Zazen. The sound of the bell could be heard faintly coming from the distant Zendo. Otohiro felt his father move slightly. Suzuki's hand reached over and clutched his arm. Get Baker, came a thin whisper. Otohiro jumped out of bed and ran into the tatami room. Mother, something's happening with father. He said to get Baker. Without a word, Oak-san leapt up and went quickly down to the Zendo. Richard had just sat down on his cushion and straightened his robes when Oak-san opened the side door. Lu was sitting in the space nearest her. Get Zentatsu, she whispered urgently. Richard took long strides to the Zendo door and then dashed up the stairway to Suzuki's room. Oak-san and Otohiro left Suzuki alone with Richard. He was still conscious, and with the last strength of his life, he just barely reached his hand out to his beloved disciple. Half sitting, half kneeling by the bed, Richard held his hand and touched his forehead to Suzuki's. They rested that way for a few moments. Then Richard felt the man most dear to him slip away, let go of his life. Slowly, Suzuki Roshi faded away, so gently that Richard could not tell when he died. He just knew that it had happened. Richard let go of Suzuki's hand. He waited a moment, then felt for a pulse. Then he went outside to Oksana no Hiro. Richard had his hand on his heart. He spoke in Japanese with voice cracking, and he told them, Suzuki Roshi's life has ended. Comments on Chapter 19 of Crooked Cucumber, The Life and Zen Teaching of Shunryu Suzuki, Final Season. One comment on Chapter 18. When I talk about Trungpa being there, it says he came in June. I know that's because people were telling me that. But listen, some people were saying he came in 71 and some in 69. He had come in 1970. If he'd come in 71, he and Suzuki wouldn't have had time to have a relationship. It says he came in June. And I might have mentioned, I don't remember any guests. And then I look back at Ruvain Ben Human's interview. And he said that guest season had not quite started. Well, I can only remember the guest seasons starting May 1st. Now, maybe it didn't that year, they weren't, but I think it was starting May 1st. So I think Trungpa came in late April. I think it was right before the guest season started. I don't remember any guests. I remember when we were in the dining room, there was nobody else there, and it wasn't, it just wasn't, we just weren't set up for guests then. That's my memory. And I don't think there was a lot of planning in them coming down, and they got some very nice rooms. Our prime rooms. So, anyway, no big deal. The basic facts are still the same. But, you get into this sort of thing, and then don't know the difference between Dharma and whether it was April or June. But, that's Dharma too. I remember one time Trungpa and I were taking a piss together. And I said to him, hey, my father died when I was pretty young, and I remember when I was a little boy, he and I used to piss together into a toilet. And at some point I said, I don't know, we were drinking, and I said, yeah, they teach us to memorize the names of the capitals of the 50 states. Can you believe that? That's education. He said, that's the Dharma. So I can say, well, knowing whether he came in April or June, that's the Buddha Dharma. So Suzuki Roshi and Carlo drive out and have that picnic up top and look out over the beautiful landscape. Yeah, and sometimes you can see the ocean up there. It's not at the very top where we stop. It's the first place it levels off. And it depends on what year you're there, what it's like, because there'll be a fire come through and clear everything, and then you can see. You can see because that brush gets up a little too high some places, especially on the other side where you can look down over at the Salinas Valley and the Arroyo Seco area and all that. Anyway, they go join Soen Nakagawa in San Juan Bautista, where he was doing his sesshin. Yeah, at the mission there. And Edo was with him, Edo Shimano. And I remember one thing he said to Louise Welsh was there, and she was pregnant. And he said, what did he say to her? Just a second, I'm going to look it up. Louise says, Louise Pryor. She was Welsh, but she and Dan broke up around 1980 or something in the 1970s, and she's been Louise Pryor. So she says, when Suzuki Roshi left Tassajara for the last time, I went with him and Oksan and Yvonne, and we stopped, and Angie, and Dan, and we stopped by the end of a sesshin at San Juan Bautista, and we had tea with Soen Roshi. He made powdered green tea for everyone. I was very pregnant, almost ready to pop. When he served me tea, he said, unless your child is like Buddha, of what use is another child in this world? I said nothing. I didn't take it terribly seriously. Yeah, Soen was, he was a bit of a showman. He was a lot of fun for me. I don't know about, now, the people I know who've studied with him never said he was a lot of fun. Dan Welsh and Bob Walter. And then Suzuki talked about, them meeting with Soen and drinking the tea. In his last lecture, he only gave one more lecture when he went back. And this is Soen, we bowed. Suzuki said we bowed maybe more than 30 times, calling out many Buddhas' names. Sunshine Buddha, Moonlight Buddha, Dead Sea Buddha, Good Practice Buddha. Yeah. And then he said some interesting things about Soen, and he served us matcha from a bowl which he made himself. What he was doing, I don't know, and he didn't know. He looked very happy, but that happiness is very different from the happiness we usual people have. Our practice should go to that level where there is no human problem, no Buddha problem, where there is nothing, to have tea, to take cake, to make a trip from one place to another is his practice. He has no idea of helping people. What he is doing is helping, but he himself has no idea of helping people. There's on Quk.com, I posted an email from Stuart Lax, who was at the first practice period. And Stuart's been very critical of people idolizing Zen teachers, unrealistically. And he got the feeling from what Suzuki said there, that was quoted right here that I just read, that Suzuki's saying Soen is not a usual person. And he sort of felt that Suzuki was elevating Zen teachers above normal people. No, I don't see it that way. He said, I don't know what he was doing, and he didn't know. And he looked very happy, but that happiness is very different from the happiness we usual people have. He's including someone there. He's talking about here. He's talking about the Sambhogakaya Buddha, or our higher consciousness. So that the happiness of our higher consciousness is different from our usual consciousness. And notice he said that we usual people have. So listen, there was plenty usual about Soen. I love the way he ended his last lecture. It's very simple, but to solve our human problem doesn't cover all of Buddhist practice. And we don't know how long it takes for us to make the Buddha trip. We have many trips, work trips, space trips, the various trips we must have. The Buddha trip is a very long trip. This is Buddhism. Thank you very much. So the last thing he said in the public lecture was, thank you very much. I remember when Bill Redican was working on making the verbatim transcripts of the Suzuki audio archive. Bill got very touched by every lecture ending with thank you very much. Now, sometimes the tape was cut off before then or ran out before then, but it was, quite consistent. So, and that was Suzuki's attitude. Thank you for studying, thank you for practicing. But I love that. The Buddha trip is a very long trip. This is Buddhism. He just puts it in a big scale there, in a very simple way, very simple, normal language. Now, when Ryuho Yamada comes, and he was quite a character. I'll get into Ryuho later, some other time. His whole story is just too much, too far out to bring out here, and who he is and what happened to him. I stayed close with him right up till when he died, right before when he died, which wasn't that long ago. I don't know how long ago. I don't know, 10 years ago. But the quotes there, I don't say all the time, Ryuho said, Ryuho thought, but when it says, but in America, the students were straightforward and everything was clear. That's just straight quote from him. He was so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed when he came. He was so innocent. And he really got into it. He really got into the whole hippie thing. He loved it. He loved what was happening in America. And he loved young people, and he got really out there. But like I said, we'll leave that part for later. But what we have from him is a wonderful observation on the inside of Suzuki and Okusan and the people who were visiting. And I'm really glad for it. I interviewed him in Nara, Japan, way up in the mountains. God, when was that? That was 2003. No, it couldn't have been. It was 1994. Oh, really? Wow. It was 1994. I was in Japan for 2 weeks doing interviews for Crooked Cucumber, mainly staying with Hoitsu in Rinso, but I had to go see Ryuho. And, you know, I had to go from Rinso in, that's Yaizu, go to Shizuoka, take the Shinkansen to Kyoto. Well, no, to go all the way to Osaka. I think I did stay in Kyoto. I visited people in Kyoto. I might have interviewed somebody there, but that's where my best friends are. But anyway, then to Osaka, and to get to Nara, you got to take a special train line, and it's not JR. JR is like 90% of transportation, you know, buses and trains and everything, or quite a bit of it, especially trains. But there's a non-JR train, and it goes Nara. And then once I get in Nara, I had to take a bus way up in the hinterland of Nara to some remote little village. And then I guess somehow I connected with Ryuho, and he took me to this Shinto shrine that was amazingly beautiful and new. And the priest there was a former Yakuza boss, you know, a gangster who'd retired and, you know, become a Shinto priest. And Ryo said he hit up all his old Yakuza contacts for like $30 million to build this shrine up there. Yeah, it was really something. And there was a waterfall near there, and Ryuho would go do Taki Shugyo every day. Taki is waterfall, and Shugyo is practice. Taki's one of the first words I learned in Japanese. I learned it from Bishop Sumi, Togen Sumi, you know, who was the priest down in Los Angeles. When we hiked up to the Hogback in 1967, and could look over and see the waterfall. Then he taught me that name, Taki, and I never forgot it. Anyway, I remember the Shinto priest. He didn't, you know, he had a white robe on. He was very friendly, nice guy, sort of tough older guy, and he didn't drink. He smoked. And Ryuho and I drank and smoked and just stayed up all night. Our host, he didn't speak any English, and Ryu had excellent English. And we did like at least an hour of him talking about his, about, I don't know, Zen and America and Suzuki and Zen Center and all that. And then at least an hour about the rest of his life, which is really a trip. Anyway, that was a great side trip, great interview. And then Mickey Stunkard comes. I call him Albert Stunkard in the book, but everybody calls him Mickey. And he's the one that recognized that Suzuki had cancer. And you know, one thing, I never tried to interview Suzuki's doctor, and he was still listed in San Francisco as a doctor, much, much later. You know, like, I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that. There's a number of people I didn't get to, you know, some of the Japanese there. But, you know, I could spend all my time talking about what I haven't gotten to. And I think, I didn't do so-and-so, I didn't do so-and-so. And then, you know, the voice of a higher wisdom comes in and says, good Lord, drop it, man. It doesn't matter. You know, you can't do everything. And, you know, thoughts like that and regrets and this and that, you know what they are? They're just ways to hide from ourselves. Just to, you know, just another emotion to have so you don't face yourself. That's what I think. So I just treat them like devils, like evil spirits. Just, okay, go away. I don't need you. Or I'll just say, shut up. I could tell you a lot about Mickey Stunker, too. Wow, I've got some good stuff from him. He sent me the part of his book they worked, I think it never got published, that had to do with Suzuki and a lot on Zen. And he knew D.T. Suzuki, of course, quite well. He was his doctor in Japan, right after the war. And, he studied with, like it says, with Nakagawa Yasutani. His main teacher, though, was Isui Miura, who was brought over by the First Zen Institute in New York City. He developed an incompatibility with him. Mickey lived in, he was at the University of Pennsylvania, something like that, and I think he was head of their medical department for a while. Anyway, he was their most prestigious person. Those titles and stuff changed, and he was a nationally recognized expert on obesity. And he sent me, I have it on geek.com, something he wrote on obesity where he has a picture of Suzuki and quotes him. Anyway, I think he was a Dharma heir of Miura. I think he was Miura's closest disciple. Oh, here's a mistake I had in the book that I'm changing. It says, when it talks about who came in to hear Suzuki announce that he had cancer, it says, Mel drove him from Berkeley and Bill Kwong came from Mill Valley. Bill Kwong was Shuso, the head monk at Tassajara at that time. He came in from Tassajara. Bill went to that when Suzuki announced he had cancer. He might have been the only person from Tassajara to go. Well, wouldn't have gone alone. I don't know. Anyway, I didn't go. Just recently, the Saturday before last, there was a podcast put up with Yvonne Rand, not with her, about her. It was a couple of hours. I just read interviews and stuff about her and interviews from her and things she'd written. And so there's a tremendous amount there about Suzuki's, final days. I think I captured the essence of it in Crooked Cucumber, but you can find more there or by listening to that. Or you can just go to Cuke.com and, check out Yvonne Rand's page. And, there's the interview I did with her, but also there's one of the links is to something she wrote on Suzuki and how that led to her getting into hospice. And she became, she taught Frank Ostaseski. In fact, I have Frank Ostaseski's, who ran the Zen hospice for many years. I have a piece he wrote about her when he learned she was in hospice care. Anyway, on that podcast and on the website there, a tremendous amount from Yvonne about all that. But I sort of think of the lineage also of Yvonne getting into hospice and getting into helping people when they're dying, being with people when they're dying. And she taught Frank Ostaseski how to when somebody dies, how to prepare their body to be, to stay in the home for 3 days. You have to plug them up because they'll run. And different things, how to wash them. And then, he became, anyway, I've already said that. But Yvonne's roommate at Stanford was Martha Freebairn Smith. Well, whatever Martha's name was before she was Freebairn Smith, and then she became Martha DeBarros. And Martha was with San Francisco Hospice for like 30 years or so, I don't know, a long time. You know, I don't know how much Yvonne learned from Martha about it, but Martha was into all that first, and then Yvonne. But Yvonne really got it first from being with Suzuki when he was dying. It says in there that, you know, Suzuki's dying, and it's getting weak and dying just a lot quicker than he thought possible. You know, so he's saying to Claude he wants to give transmission. And the way Claude told it to me is he told me he wanted to give transmission from to a number of people, a number of disciples. He said, and I remember Claude said, I wasn't among them. I don't know why that would be, because Claude said 6 to 12. Yeah, come on. If he's going to give transmission to a whole bunch of people, Claude would have to have been one of them. But that's what he said. But anyway, it couldn't have been 12. And in the book it said, give transmission to 6 to 12 disciples. I changed that. 12's impossible. That's just too many. I'd say to 6 or more is what I changed it to. And even that, I mean, if it got into 12, then you know, I would have been one of them, the last people he ordained, and that would be ridiculous. No way. No way. Lou Richmond, yeah, I could see, because Lou was, you know, mature and focused and all that. Ed Brown, yeah, but not Angie and me. Angie was a devoted disciple of Suzuki's, and, you know, she stayed next door, but she didn't continue that long. I don't know how long. I can't remember. I don't see her continuing being a priest in the Zen Center or anything. She got into Tibetan Buddhism in rather recent years, and I think she's in Colorado now. She did a 3-year solo retreat not long ago. Anyway, if it's clear that if Suzuki had have lived, that things would have been very different. There wouldn't have just been Richard Baker. So what happened when he died, there was just Richard Baker. That's the only one who got transmission. Others have been ordained, and he made it very clear he wanted Bill Kwong to get transmission. Baker had a more... He didn't have as loose a feeling about who to give transmission to. And he didn't give transmission to people just because Suzuki wanted to after that. Then Bill Kwong and Mel and Les Kay. Gosh, Les Kay isn't mentioned here. I should ask him. He and I are in touch. I should ask him if he came to that or was included in that announcement there. He would have been one of the people to get transmission because he and Mel definitely, because they were dependable and they were both running centers. So Les, Mel, and Bill Kwong are the ones that really make sense to give transmission to, because all three of them had groups. And all three of them went to Japan and got transmission from Hoitsu. And that's probably the best. And that worked out very well. And there was a podcast with Les. Well, you know what Les did is he wrote his podcast out. He just felt more comfortable, and I think he did a really good job. So that was like 3 weeks ago. I read everything he wrote. Then I read stuff I had on him and from him. and that worked pretty well. And he talks about getting transmission from Hoitsu and what he had to go through for that. It was pretty interesting. And Silas Hoadley would have been right at the top of the list of who to get transmission. Silas was the only person before Richard Baker came back who he was letting give talks. And when Jerry Fuller, may he rest in peace, dear Jerry, when Jerry saw Suzuki, for the last time when he was ill, Suzuki said, "Don't worry, you'll be fine. You have Dick and Silas." The reason he wouldn't have said Bill then is because Bill had his own group, and he was off, in Mill Valley. Bill made it very clear, like in 1963, that he wasn't comfortable being in a competitive relationship with Richard Baker, and he stopped coming to sit at Sokoji except on Saturdays when he was the cook. I remember him as the cook back then, and he had such form. He was just so into it. And when he had these long toes, and when he'd bring the offering in, the first thing he'd do would be to bring the offering in for the altar. And we'd all be sitting there. Our meals were just like another zazen. It wasn't orioke with the wrapped bowls. It was trays. Yeah, it was before Tassar and all that. He'd come in with the offering to the altar, and then he'd face the altar, and then he had to go sideways. And when he went sideways, it's like his toes would go one at a time over. It was like it was to me like his toe, like if you put your hand together and put it down, then you put your little finger out and your next finger down. It was like that. It was like his toes were crawling across the floor, and that's what he'd do when he'd serve Suzuki first. It would be like that. And I'd always look at his feet and watch him do that and go, wow. And we had very austere breakfasts, like white rice porridge and miso soup and pickles. Then once we got to Sahara, everything changed, and the food became robust, brown rice, etc. So it said, Richard Baker returned with Virginia and Sally. I added, and their daughter, Sally, because by then, a lot of readers would go, Sally, who, what? Then Hoitsu comes, Suzuki's two kids who live in Japan, Hoitsu and Yasuko, come with the mono. And they came to Tassajara. And I was the assistant director. Now, Dan was the director, and Dan spoke Japanese, so I'm sure he spent a lot of time with them. But I showed him around. I remember that. And I remember I took Hoitsu up. I think it was just him and me. I don't know. I mean, that's a long time ago. What I remember is him and me. But it could have been Yasuko, too, and Amano. I just don't remember Yasuko and Amano there. I remember Hoitsu. And, I knew a little bit of Japanese. I'd studied quite a bit, so I could get by a little bit with mess before I went to Japan. But I took him up to the ashes site. Now, we already had Trudy's ashes up there. But Suzuki, in his, I don't remember. I didn't get into this in the book. It's amazing. It's a 450-page book, but I really couldn't, I had to really be very frugal in what I said, what I included. Suzuki had chosen a stone for himself, and it was a big old river stone, and it was brought up there by a group on a sled, on an iron sled with a chain, and it's like 4 feet tall. It's beautiful. It has a marbled front to it, and his ashes are there under it. And Trudy's, and there's a stupa for each of them. I got the stupas later. All this I'll deal with in Tassahara Stories. The book, I liked finishing the book with Suzuki's death and not getting into anything, not the cremation, the funeral, nothing, just end with his death. So I'll in Tassahara Stories, I'll deal with all that stuff. But anyway, I took Hoitsu up there and I showed him where his father's ashes will be. And I showed him the waterfall, and we walked around. I remember Richard Baker thought that was rather insensitive of me. But different way of looking at it. And then Yasuko said, finally she could forgive her father for her mother's death. This is a very big deal to them, to all of them, to Amano and Hoitsu and her, to see what had happened here. And it was so important to Suzuki. See what's happening. Stay for the ceremony. When Dick gets the mountain seat ceremony, take it back. Tell people, So that was really important. And it's something that, I forget about. Atoning for his wife's death. Japanese, it is just, whenever I hear gossip from Japanese, my teacher said this or that, it'll be from Suzuki ran to America to hide in shame after his wife was murdered, or, that naturally something like a murder, that's the sort of thing that really sticks in people's minds, and there was, but with us who knew him and studied with him, or those who didn't know him, who came afterwards, his wife's murder is it's a shocking, memorable piece of his life, but it fades in comparison. Not in comparison. It fades. It pales in the shadows with everything else about him there. Now in the ceremony, it talks about the instruments, the taiko drum, hoku. I didn't use the Japanese. I have it here. The handheld bell. Inking. We said inking. We say inking there. The wooden clackers, kaishaku. We say kaishaku too, or at least we did back then. They probably still do. And then I used the sounds. I say the high chin chun of the handheld bell, half tone apart, and the kachin of the wooden clackers. Those are not words I would have thought of or used. Those are very clearly what the sounds the Japanese make for them. That's very clearly the words, the sounds of the words that the Japanese use for those. Like we say bow wow for a dog, and they say wan wan. So that's what they say for those things. And I'd forgotten that, but when I read it, I go, chin chun, where did I get that? Oh, obviously I got it from that's what they say. One little tiny addition I made after the ceremony, and that ceremony, where the mountain seat ceremony is that that's what sticks in people's minds. That is the most memorable event for all the zillions of people I've interviewed and talked to. Anyone who was there, that is riveted into their mind. It was a very, very emotional and profound experience. And the high point of it was when Suzuki, on his way out, stops, looks to the left, and he rolls that stick, and the rings in the top of his stick, they jangle. Then he looks to the right and does it again, and it jangles, and that just sent a shockwave out into the room. And that was his parting statement. Not the thing I read earlier from the lecture. I mean, that was his parting lecture statement. But the one that really was like a bomb in our memories and in our minds was him rolling that stick. And then it says in the book that immediately afterwards, that it says 20, he met with the disciples in the tatami room, his doksan room, his study upstairs. And it's one of the bigger rooms for in the apartments. Well, that's the only apartment. That was the only real apartment. There were 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 rooms connecting, with the bathroom. And so 20 could fit in there, and it said 20 sat on the tatami in his sitting room. I added 20 or so. It says 20 or so sat on the tatami in his sitting room. I made it 20 or so of us sat on the tatami in his sitting room. I think I should have said that. So I am saying that now. And then Katagiri, that's another high point, where he turns to Katagiri and says, "Thank you for everything you've done. I'm so grateful," and all that. Katagiri told me years later, he said, he never thanked me for anything, never said anything. I said, yes, he did. And it blew your mind. He did when we all met right after Dick's mountain seat ceremony. When Suzuki said that, Katagiri just broke out howling and walked on his knees over to Suzuki, sobbing and howling, and then hugged him, going, "Don't die, don't die." I think he was saying it in English. And then Suzuki said, "Daijobu, daijobu. It's all right. It's all right." Yeah, that was something. In fact, I can't remember anything else from it. I don't think I said anything in particular. He just met with people, and he looked happy, and and Dick looked, mind blown, and it was the first time. He's Abbott now. He wasn't sitting up straight and lording over us at all. He was genuinely feeling humbled by the experience. Later, in a page later or 2 pages later, it says Suzuki's style was to let things happen, nudging them patiently, waiting, acting skillfully by not acting rashly. He hadn't known how quickly his illness would overcome him. Some disciples were disturbed. A few had postponed or given up careers to devote themselves to studying with this dying man. Would he leave no final instructions? Now, that came from Lou Richmond. Lou Richmond really made that point later when I interviewed and when I've talked to him. He felt that was a real omission on Suzuki's part. Now, I didn't. I didn't want any instructions. I didn't, people are different. So, that was the way Lou felt. And I can see that. He just sort of passes it on to Baker and he goes, well, good luck, everybody, and then dies. But, what could he do? What could he say? It's also clear that as he's dying, he realizes there's many things he'd wanted to do, and he's dying too quick and getting too weak to do them. Look, he didn't even come to our ordination of Ed and Lou and Angie and me. Incidentally, that ordination, Craig Boyan does not figure in the book. He's in Tassara Stories, though. What a character, a great guy. He was going to be the 5th person ordained that day, and he decided not to do it the day before. Craig was a very emotional, sweet person. Everybody loved him. But he was torn between being a Suzuki disciple and a Meher Baba devotee. And the Meher Baba thing was bhakti, it was devotion. And Meher Baba was very prominent guru from back then. He'd already died at that point. Craig was supposed to come to the ceremony rehearsal the day before. I remember him, we're sitting in there, he's supposed to be there. Katagiri's there, the rest of us are there. And Craig sat in the hall sobbing. He decided not to do it. And that's fine. That was good to see. I think he was right. And he decided to go with the Meher Baba group. And I remember when Diane Goldschlag and I got married 2 years later in that same room, the Buddha Hall at Zen Center, right inside the front door, to your right. That when we got married, right after our wedding, we went to a Meher Baba play with Craig Boyan and visited him. Anyway, so then Katagiri's got us there, and everybody's very serious, and, it's a heavy time, and Suzuki's dying, actually, it was harder on other people than it was on me. Same when my father died. It's because I was raised with, a sort of cosmic consciousness. Mind is God, and death is not real. It's just, death is real, but death is, you don't die, you just take a different form. And so when my father died, I cried for 15 minutes, and I knew his practice would continue. I was 11 years old. So, I was very sad about Suzuki dying. Like I said in the book, after we visited him, after we were ordained, I went up on the roof and I cried. I let a lot of emotion out that I hadn't. But, people in America would tend to say, I'd just been bottling up my emotion. And like if you don't express emotion, we've all got the same amount, and it's all down there. If you don't express it, then you're repressing it. I don't agree with that. Some people are more emotional. They generate more emotion. I can certainly generate a lot of emotion. But anyway, but it was very serious. But, Katagiri said, this isn't right. I can't ordain you for him. You should wait and let Dick Baker do this. And everybody went, yeah, we shouldn't do this. We should put it off and I said, no. We want you to ordain us for Suzuki tomorrow. This is what he wanted. We have people coming for it. It's too late to change it. And everybody went, and he went, okay. You know, I wanted that ordination. Because to me it was, I didn't want to be a priest. I didn't have any ideas about that. It was something to do with Suzuki, and it expressed my relationship with him. And I knew if we didn't get it then, that, it would go back to scratch. Anyway, so that's what happened there. And then Suzuki's last night, isn't that interesting? He wakes up like in the middle of the night, says he wants a bath. He wants to be clean before he dies. And, they say, no, you don't, Well, and he said, no, I want a bath. One thing I did not include, now Otohiro tells about that, right? And Otohiro lives in San Francisco and was in San Francisco. He was working for Japan Airlines, and then he had his own travel company, and he still does, for Japanese coming there. Otohiro, I should have interviewed him in Japanese. He would have been much more expressive, I think. He and his wife are very sweet. They're just such sweet people. And his kids, just so nice. When Otohiro was giving him the bath, he told me after his father's bath, when he picked him up out of the bath, that he dropped him. And then he said, I know he didn't drop him far, but he said ever since then he's had a lingering feeling that he'd killed his father. Isn't that terrible? I didn't know you didn't kill your father. He was dying. He knew he was dying. He was going to die that night. That didn't matter at all. But I didn't want to include that in the book. It's too much. And I didn't want to add any more to how Otohiro felt about it. It was nothing. It is something. It would have been an interesting point. I'm making it now. But, there was a certain tone there happening that it's a little too jarring. All right. Now, then Amano comes, and Amano's getting ready to leave, and Suzuki gave his mala bracelet, the one with the skull-shaped beads, to Amano. And he told Okusan to roll up a scroll for Yasuko and to give Hoitsu the staff with the bronze rings he'd carried in the ceremony. The clangor on top of the staff was the last item he wanted to return to Rinso-in of those that he had borrowed when he'd left in 1959. And guess what? Hoitsu didn't get the staff. And he has mentioned it to me, decades later. That sesshin that was happening, that had just started when Okusan came down and told Lou, "Get Zentatsu," she said. He hadn't even fully sat down for the first period. Pretty good timing, Suzuki, huh? And it's interesting, it was the 4th of December. It was the first day of an abbreviated Rohatsu sesshin. They always start on the 1st. But, I've never heard this, but I assume that it was, it's obvious to me, it was cut short. They didn't start it till the 4th because of, everything that was happening. At Dasahara, we started on the 1st. I was sitting next to Dan Welsh. He was director. I was the assistant director. We were right up at the front on the left side of the zendo. Yeah, I remember. the phone call, hearing the phone ring in the office. And Dan got up and went out to answer it. I believe it was Dan. And came back in. I wonder who remembers that moment there. It was announced. I think Dan announced it. I think Dan, maybe he stood up and announced it to us while we were sitting that Suzuki Roshi had just died. But I can't remember for sure. I remember when, on that day, I believe it was October 11th, when Suzuki announced to his disciples in the city that he had cancer. We got word at Tassajara, right after that. And I remember Diane was there, and I saw her on the steps to the dorm, and I remember telling her, and I remember I was crying. Or I cried a little, telling her. Not on and on. So, I can tell you something else. A weird thing happened. When it was announced that Suzuki died, at some point, I just stood up and walked out of the Zendo, and I went to my cabin, and I lay down in my bed, and I got a book, Never Cry Wolf, and I just lay there and read the entire thing. And I'm a slow reader, but I just read the whole thing. And I guess I read it pretty fast, because at some point I got up hours later, like came back at 4 p.m. or something and rejoined the session. Nobody said a word to me. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to check out for a while. I just read the book. I didn't grieve. I just didn't think anything. I just went back there and read the book. And that was a good session. There was one night where we didn't sleep. It could have been more than one night. And another thing, Katagiri introduced a massage period where we massaged the backs of each other, for a while, for 10 minutes or something. He was feeling some sort of freedom there that he'd never had, and that he knew he wouldn't have in Dick Baker's Zen Center. He was happy to help out, but, he wanted to be free. He wanted to be free of Suzuki, too. There was a lot of sitting. Yeah, I can remember sitting all night, and during the night, Dan and I, you know what it was like? It was like we were sailboats, just sailing into the universe. Later, Katagiri said to me, "You and Dan were really sitting that night." So, we've got a little bit more to read, an epilogue, and maybe some notes in the end matter. And we're going to wrap up this reading of Crooked Cucumber, The Life and Zen Teaching of Shunryu Suzuki, next week. And then I will tell you I am going to take a break, not from doing podcasts, but from doing this type of podcast. This is the one that's the most time-consuming because I'm much more particular about how the chapter is read, and I go over it very carefully. And I've got stuff I've got to catch up on, and Katrinka is bugging me to take some time off. So we'll see what happens. Anyway. So thank you very much for joining us. And I hope you find it in your heart to go over to go over to Cuke.com's homepage. Hit that donate button. And the donate link on the bottom too. And go to that donate page. You can get there from Cuke Audio Podbean too. And we'd love it if you'd send us a little support there. Check, PayPal donation, or becoming a subscriber for as little as $1 a month. It's really easy to do. And it would make us all feel good. So, until next time, I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dogette Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. Wishing you and yours and all good Americans to register to vote and then to vote. And also wishing you and all of us a grand awakening.